Welcome to Thinking Nations series, Thinking Historically, where we connect students to scholars and their research as they explore historical topics and arguments in their classes. Today, we are thinking historically with Dr. Nadya Williams, Professor of Ancient History at University of West Georgia. Dr. Williams, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's exciting.
So to start, I'm going to share my screen and we'll look at the same question that students will be answering when they're using the Thinking Nation curriculum. So Dr. Williams, if you were to answer this prompt that students are engaging with, how did the idea of citizenship change over time in ancient Rome? How would you approach it?
Well, so you can't really think about this question without thinking about the growth of Rome. So whenever you have something that is a nation that starts out as this tiny village, I mean, imagine this tiny village on swampy River Tiber, and it grows to be this massive empire, the largest of its time. So, of course, the question of citizenship is going to come into it. So how are things going to change from just as you conquer more and more territory? And that is exactly what the Romans had to deal with. The more people you bring into Rome, the more you have to redefine, like, what do we do with it? What do we do with this? Who are these people? Are they all going to be just conquered subjects, or do we give them citizenship? And over time, it seems like as the Romans conquered them, initially it seemed like it was more just, let's conquer everybody we can, and then start thinking about these questions. But they definitely had to start thinking about these questions pretty early on.
So what I heard initially was this idea of expansion, right? The as Rome expands, so does at least thinking about citizenship and who is a citizen.
Yeah.
If that is maybe the focus of how you would approach it, this idea of expansion, do you think that there are other ways that historians might approach that question, with maybe expansion not being at the center, but some other facet of Roman society?
That's an interesting way to think about it because, of course, you kind of have to consider that angle as well, since Rome, most of the expansion happens in the period of the Roman Republic, right? So by the time we get into the empire, I mean, there's still some expansion. The empire reaches its highest extent under the rule of Trajan, so early 2nd century CE. But after that, it's really the question of, like, what do we do with all this territory? So um, so I think if you look at the period of the empire, it is more thinking in the terms that you proposed, and that scholars who study the later 2nd century on period are thinking about it. How does the idea of citizenship change um, in this larger thing? And so, of course, that's where the Edict of Caracalla, for example, comes in, where Caracal, who is a pretty problematic emperor in a lot of ways, uh, presents this decree that completely changed everything. This idea that at the moment that the decree was made, every single freeborn male in, or well, not just freeborn, but free male in the empire at that moment is suddenly a citizen, meaning you don't have to jump through hoops, serve in the military, or do whatever other things that people used to do to get citizenship if they didn't have it originally. So that certainly revolutionizes things. And some scholars have argued that this is why the Roman Empire later on, after the Edict of Caracalla, had such a hard time attracting soldiers. It used to be this special perk. You serve in the Roman Empire for a quarter century or so, depending which division you served in, and you get citizenship, and that's that. But if you don't have to risk your life for a quarter century in the service of Rome to get citizenship, that's kind of a game changer.
That's a bargain that's hard to pass up. Um, you mentioned the problematic nature of Karakala. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more to that, as in our unit, students are mostly just looking at the edict, and so what was some context around Caracal himself?
So this is one of those families where, like, you don't want to be like Caracala's family. So we have so the story is he had a brother, and when his father, the Emperor Septimius Severus, died, he left the two brothers, Caracalla and Geta, as joint emperors. And let's just say Geta doesn't make it very long after that. And in fact, we have art objects where we can see Caracalla erasing Geta's image. So there are official portraits
Wow.
of the imperial family where you can see those erasures, and also inscriptions where there's an erasure. You can see, like, it lists the full imperial family, except like there's a gap, where somebody
Wow.
erased something, and we know, like, oh yeah, that was Geta listed as part of the family, except we don't talk about him anymore. And that's actually, I mean,
Hmm.
it sounds scandalous, but and it is scandalous, but it actually was a pretty common practice in
Okay.
the Roman world. This erasure. You can literally erase somebody from the official record if you decided to. Somebody is subject to the Roman term damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory, then you erase them from public record.
That's yeah, that's fascinating from a modern perspective. Uh, so we have Karakala, who is, and I'll kind of stay on him for a minute, who is seems very self-absorbed, interested in kind of preserving his own singular leadership. Um, Also, greatly expanding citizenship for the Roman Empire. How do those two things work hand in hand?
Well, he liked being popular. A lot of emperors did. Um, it's kind of nice to have this public adoration. And so this edict was certainly a way to win favor. So kind of abusing power, but in a way that makes you look good. Now, at the same time, there's also, of course, the lack of foresight when we consider the repercussions of a decree like this one. Well, so for example, just the administrative implications. So imagine when you have an empire with a very structured bureaucracy and everybody knows
Hmm.
what their place is in society. And suddenly, just like this, you completely turned all the rules over, saying everybody
Right.
is a citizen who wasn't before. So the administrative kind of toll would have been extreme. And of course, we mentioned the Roman army. Um, so so there are a lot of implications that he clearly did not consider.
Yeah. So this next question is a little bit of a conjecture based on a student who engaged with our curriculum recently, and she wondered if this mass expansion of citizenship had a hand in the fall of the Roman Empire, in that the growth of the citizen population grew so fast that the government itself did not know quite what to do with it. I'm wondering if you can speak to that. If that is a possibility, or if there were a lot of other factors at play.
I think that's a fascinating question, and it certainly makes sense, except there are so many other issues going on. So Caracalla passes his decree in 212. Just a decade later, the empire will plunge into a civil war or a round of civil wars that will last until 284 when Diocletian will become emperor. So we're just, obviously, Caracalla had no idea. No one at the time had
Yeah.
any idea. But the empire was about to plunge into its worst crisis in probably its entire existence, the third century crisis.
Wow.
That's what historians talk about, the third century crisis. The empire that will emerge out of the third century crisis will not look anything like the empire that entered the third century crisis. But what historians like to talk about is resilience. Can you get through a crisis? And what is remarkable is that we see that resilience. Yes, the third century was really a terrible time to live in the Roman Empire. Would not recommend. But it manages to kind of emerge out of it. So with Diocletian in 284, what he figures out is this territory is so massive, one emperor can't rule it. So he divides it
Okay.
into four districts. So you get the tetrarchy, the rule of the four,
Right.
which works for a while. But the point is, kind of it really is related, actually. So I think your student is onto something. The Great Territory is related to challenges and kind of that same issue I mentioned from the beginning.
Hmm.
How do you adapt from ruling just a tiny village on the Tiber to this massive empire? So that is certainly part of the story. But we see that resilience that the Romans don't necessarily think ahead each time that these changes happen, but they
Sure.
eventually figure it out and solve whatever problem had arisen, like the third century crisis. And the empire keeps, limping along.
Limping along. When you're looking at this topic of citizenship in ancient Rome, do you have a go-to primary source or something that you feel really illuminates this topic?
Yes. So for a lot of our evidence, of course, comes from kind of more official, formal documents like this edict. But what I
Hmm.
really like are inscriptions and especially funerary epitaphs. So, tombstones, in layman's terms. We have lots and lots and lots of tombstones of everyday, regular people in the Roman Empire, and actually the Roman Republic as well, but especially from the period of the Empire. And this gives us a glimpse into people about whom we know nothing at all otherwise. And what is so
Yeah.
impressive is that they are proud of their citizenship status. So you do get tombstones of, say, like soldiers who served for however long and are now citizens, and so on and so forth. Just people working regular jobs in the Roman Empire
Sure.
who are proud to be Roman.
Yeah, that's such a cool glimpse into the common person, the common Roman, that often can go unnoticed in the official documentation. I appreciate you bringing that to light. So as you're thinking through this question, this topic, and I would say that our unit does look at this idea of expansion, both in territory and also in class and or who is able to become a citizen. Um, is there a different line of thinking that students might be able to explore around citizenship in ancient Rome that isn't explicitly brought up in our unit?
Well, one angle to remember, both in the ancient Rome unit, but also in the ancient Greece unit, is women and gender. The fact
Hmm.
that women never become citizens in the ancient world, and that's just kind of assumed. So, whenever Caracalla passes this incredible edict, like everybody gets citizenship, let's talk about the definition of everybody, because it
Sure.
only refers to men. So that's very much kind of the traditional way of thought in the ancient world. And early Christianity, for example, really will come to challenge that. The
Okay.
notion of talking about women specifically as part of society, part of the
Hmm.
household of God, and so on. Because in the Roman world, no one even thinks about it. This is just assumed.
Sure. So if a historian is exploring the role and the class of women in ancient Rome, what are some ways that they do make sure that women are included in this story?
Well, a lot of the fiction from the Roman world, of course, will refer to them. So um, we have, for example, a novel from the late second century, The Golden Ass or Metamorphosis. It's about a man who travels the Roman Empire, accidentally gets turned into a donkey, and he interacts with a lot of everyday kind of characters. It's um, it's kind of a it's kind of a sobering read because it's a lot of everyday kind of trials and tribulations where you realize, the question that I like to pose to my students is, what do you, if you lived in one of the provinces, remote provinces of the Roman Empire, what did the empire ever do for you? And the answer is not a whole lot. And this is
Wow.
especially true for women, whose situation in the Roman world was precarious. And in this novel, they're portrayed as kind of pretty much all of them are witches because like there's nothing else to do. So just a really terrible kind of almost
Yeah,
misogynistic perspective.
sure. Yeah, that's what an interesting way to get a glimpse into that time period. So our final question is more of just for fun, of interest, and that's just what drew you to study this particular era of history.
I took Latin in high school and I just fell in love with it. Just the puzzle of reading, just the idea that here I am, like sitting in, well, at that point it was still the 1990s, so still end of 20th century, but here I am sitting reading in the original something that was written in the Roman Republic. And to me, that was just so exciting to have this like connection to Caesar and Virgil. It was just really a lot of fun.
Yeah, that I can think of my own interests really, coming coming to bear in high school as I started to recognize these light bulbs going off, and it's obviously so great to see that this is what's really guiding your professional career now, from Latin in high school. Well, Dr. Nadya Williams, we appreciate you so much for giving us better insight into ancient Rome and the role of citizenship. We appreciate your scholarship and your willingness to dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you.